Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. Welcome to the Clutter Fairy Weekly for August 11th, 2020. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gail Goddard, professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. The Clutter Fairy Weekly is our weekly podcast and webcast that we put on to talk about all things organizing, and we're so glad that you came. We appreciate that everybody goes to all of our channels and makes comments, and we search through all those comments to find out what you want to talk about, and those become our topics for the week. So we really appreciate that you come and share with us.
If you're joining us in Zoom for the first time, share your comments and questions via the chat, and I'll try to make sure Gail gets to them before we move on. And during the webcast, every Tuesday, you can talk to us directly by calling 669-900-6833. Use meeting ID 993-419-863 to join the meeting. Let's get to our featured topic. Sooner or later, we either lose interest in our recreational pursuits or we lose the time, energy, or physical capacity to pursue and enjoy them. After the thrill is gone, what was once essential equipment becomes nothing but clutter. The remnants of our discarded hobbies, sports, and crafts can take up a lot of valuable space, and living with it can make us feel as if we failed or been defeated. We're going to talk today about how to think about these changes in our interests, evaluate the debris thereof, and let go of the old to make room for new passions.
Extracurricular activities are one of the joys in life, and pursuing what we find fascinating and fun with other people who share our interests really enriches our lives in so many ways. Each of us has a hobby that we spend our free time pursuing, or a sport we like to play on the weekends, or a craft we stay up at night creating. And many of us are happy to spend a big chunk of discretionary income on our sports, hobbies, and crafts. That enthusiastic spending has a downside, though, which is that we often buy more than we can ever use. Guilty times 1,000. Okay, just in case you wonder, I have more beads than I could possibly use in my lifetime, and I acknowledge this. And what happens 5 months or 5 years later when your interests have shifted? Some of us stay with the same hobby forever. Like I just said, I've been beading for 3 decades, and so I have not drifted off to other hobbies. I did other things as a younger person, but in my 30s, I took up beading, and I've been doing it ever since. Many of us try lots of activities and move from one to the next really quickly. I wasn't that person, but I have a lot of friends who rotate through a whole bunch of crafts all the time. Both the committed devotee and the recreational explorer tend to accumulate more stuff than we can comfortably manage. So have you been into quilting or knitting or sewing for a decade? I bet you have tons of supplies everywhere in your house. And most of it you've forgotten that you bought. There are supplies that you bought when you were learning, which is the craft equivalent of training wheels that you would never use now that you're an expert. There are tools you've tried and hated. I've seen a lot of those come and go. There's always the new fad tool that everybody has to have, and we all buy it simultaneously, and then we don't all come to love the tool. You end up with gifts from friends. People they know you're into beads, and so friends try to give me beads. And it's never stuff that I would buy for myself, right? My beady friends can buy for me because they've been watching me bead for a long time and they know what I'm into. But the average person that tries to buy you gifts in your hobby is probably going to miss the mark. There's always leftovers from classes that you've taken, and books and magazines everywhere. At some point, the supply starts to stifle your creativity instead of enhancing it, and it becomes a stagnant collection instead of a source of inspiration and raw material for your creative expression. If this situation describes your crafting life, it's time to sort through the collection and dispense of the excess and turn it back into a useful source of supplies. You know you're in that place where you have a craft room and you can't walk into it, or when you walk into it, it makes you throw up your hands and walk out, or when you walk into it and you want to find something you can't find what you're looking for, and you regularly rebuy things over and over again because you don't realize you've already bought it. So if you're in that position, we're describing you right now. Maybe you're the jumping bean type. So you move from interest to interest really rapidly, and you gather supplies for a new hobby and you use them for a while, and then you drop them for the next hobby that you've gotten interested in. Maybe you're an athlete that likes to try all different sports, or you jump on the latest trend in exercise classes. Every sport or fitness fad requires its own special gear, and a lot of the gear doesn't cross over to the next thing. All sports have their version of training wheels equipment too. So the result is a trail of discarded equipment and clothing in the bottom of all your closets. If this scenario sounds like you, it's time to sort through the backlog of old gear and get rid of no longer holds your fancy. And you need to learn to do this every time you leave an interest for the next big thing. I think this particularly applies to sports because what works in softball doesn't work in football, doesn't work in tennis, right? It's a whole different collection of equipment to keep something going. Why do we have such a hard time letting go of these categories of clutter? Well, for starters, we have invested a lot of time and money and energy, and the memory of what we put into our passions can make the remaining stuff feel really important. It is one of those collections where you've built the craft room and you spent a lot of your lifetime in that room, massaging that stuff, adding to it, creating things in there, then everything in that room feels like it's sacred almost. If the money you sank into a sport or a hobby is a significant issue, you might consider opening an Etsy store or selling equipment and supplies to your friends that are into the same hobby. Or you can stash in bulk on Craigslist, and you can just put your, here's my stash in a chunk that I want to sell in bulk. That's a great way to transfer. I used to be into tennis. Now I'm not into tennis. Here's all my tennis stuff. Who wants to start up tennis? And you can have a whole set all at once. But don't let the pressure of getting your money out of it slow down your organizing process. You can ask yourself this question. Would you pay full price if one of your friends offered the same items for sale? If you were at your friend's house and they were trying to sell you the tennis equipment that you're no longer into, would you pay full price for it? And if the answer is no, then it's likely that someone isn't going to pay full price from you. So don't get too wound up in getting all the money back, because the ultimate goal here is to divest of stuff that you're not into anymore. You have to think of the money as a sunk cost. You're not going to get most of it back. Besides the money, there's a sort of emotional cost to letting go of the residue of our old pastimes. It can feel like a defeat to get rid of the stuff that you used regularly once upon a time, but now you don't. It's hard to acknowledge that your life has evolved past these activities. If you had a very active engagement, it can be difficult to accept that that part of your life is over, that the activity isn't going to be part of your life anymore. Especially if you stop doing something, whether it's a craft or a sport, that you once loved because of physical limitations. We all get older and lose some capacities, and sometimes what goes wrong with our bodies means we can't do what we once did. Facing up to that change and accepting the new normal can be so upsetting, and the languishing gear just reminds us of the losses. But consider the cost of holding on. You're surrendering valuable storage space to stuff that's no longer useful, and there's an emotional anchor that goes with staring at the bag of softball equipment or looking at the wall of scrapbooking supplies that you're no longer using. It becomes a weight, a kind of burden on your mind. Looking at those rollerblades that you'll never put on again is torturing yourself and creating a sense of loss or failure. So how do we let go? Start by searching your house for the remnants of activities that you've cast aside. Identify the collections that are being ignored. Ask yourself honestly whether you see yourself doing this activity again within a finite period of time. Am I going to do that scrapbooking stuff in the next year or the next 18 months? If the answer is no, or if the answer is even probably not, then it's time to pass that stuff along. Donate it, sell it, give it to a friend who's still active in the craft or the sport. As always, we encourage artists or crafters to donate their leftover or unused tools and supplies to create a reuse center so that teachers and other artists can stock up at a reduced price. You can also make a few phone calls and find out whether a school or a library or a nonprofit can make use of what you're ready to give away. And you can always remember that because you were in that sport or you did that craft, you have a captive audience, people that still do that. You know the people that you played with and crafted with that still are into that hobby, that pursuit. and they're sort of a captive audience, right? So you can take those supplies. The bead version of this is when I go to retreats, we always have a white elephant table at the retreat, because what I no longer want to use, someone else at the retreat will use. And there's 100 people or 50 people or 20 people in the room who are into this stuff like you. And so if you can go and put it on a white elephant table and let somebody pick through it and take it home with them, then you know it's going to somebody that is interested in it like you once were. And it moves along the river of stuff to somebody else's craft room, or it moves along to the tennis person who, you know, is still actively playing tennis. I think sports in particular lends itself to this aging out of it kind of thing. If you're super, super into it and you keep doing it your whole adult life, either you're going to start with training wheel equipment, and then by the time you've been doing it for 30 years, playing tennis, for instance, you're onto some really super fancy equipment. You're spending some serious money on the stuff that you're playing with. And so the original versions that you learned on or you trained over time with become items, they become keepsakes instead of actual equipment that you would use. And so I think taking those items and saying, here, I have this collection, and somebody else that wants to get started can start with my collection and learn to love the game like I've learned to love it, for instance. We also, if you don't stay with it, you try the rollerblades. We all had rollerblades in the 80s. Everybody tried rollerblades in the 80s. And, you know, I could no more put rollerblades on now and not kill myself than, you know, walking down the street. And so, you know, there's some that are just don't make sense anymore. They're a young person's game, or they're only good if you stick with it and you can stay limber and, you know, not kill yourself when you fall down. And so having that equipment hanging around as a reminder of what you did when you were in your 20s or 30s is just taking up some valuable space, and it's deteriorating in place. If you're never actually going to go and put those skates on again, or you're not going to go play badminton in the backyard, or you're not, you know, if all those things aren't happening for you anymore, then letting somebody else play with them and actively use them is the equivalent of, you know, not parking it in the corner and letting it die. You're refreshing its life and its use by sending it on to somebody else. I think that this happens a lot also with kids, because when they're young, your kids are running through like 4 million sports, right? You're looking for the activity that keeps them active and holds their interest. And maybe they do more than one because they're young and they can run around nonstop, and they can join in 5 different sports involving balls, and they can keep going all day long, and it's at school and whatever. But they also have equipment that is size appropriate for their age. So what they use when they're 10 years old is not what you would use as a 20-year-old. And so there's probably if you have kids who have gone through sports in their life, you probably have a whole collection of size appropriate gear that no one in your family can use anymore. And so that gear absolutely is in the training wheel category and needs to move on to somebody else who has kids the appropriate age, right? There's always a sports team of kids they're doing baking fundraisers to raise money for the kids to play the sport. Like there's always a team somewhere that could use free equipment. And so you just have to do a little reaching out to find it. And I'm sure that they will go to a new home and be well loved and well used and not languishing in your garage anymore or in your son's closet or under your son's bed there. So who has questions for me about the idea of dealing with the extras, leftovers?
Gail, I think in some sports, some athletic activities, people tend to, like, as you said, as you get better at it, you look for better equipment. And
yeah, you level up.
One that comes to mind is all the bike guys I know. I'm not a bike guy. I have one bike and I hardly ever ride it. But the guys who are really into bikes are always reading about the better bike they could have, and
better tires,
saving. Yeah, the better brakes, the better pedals, and saving to upgrade, and keeping the old bike because they spent a lot of money on it. And so they end up with a garage full of bikes and they can only ride one at a time. Hobby.
And they're not likely to trade it out because each successive bike is more expensive with more fancy gear and more important. All those bikes are ever more fancy equipment, ever more expensive. And I know they spend, $1,200, $2,000. Like it's a big money hobby. Costs a lot of money. And then you have all those funky shoes and you have all those funky clothes. No one wears their little bike running outfits anywhere else because frankly, they're kind of obscene. But you have to like have the right gear on while you're doing it. Yeah. And, maybe that's also an example of one, like you rode a bike when you were younger, but you don't feel comfortable and stable on them now. And so you may have pursued it for a decade during your earlier life. And now you wouldn't get on a bicycle if somebody paid you a lot of money. If you've evolved past it physically, then it's a perfect thing to send along on the way. We have somebody who's raised their hands down there in the chat, I see.
Rowan, go ahead. Rowan, go ahead.
Oh, there she is. Hi.
Hi. So how does one deal with or know whether you're just collecting stuff because it has creative potential? There's that pack ratting thing, and how to deal with that, and also how the thing about but I might need it becomes so much more intense with craft supplies. So right. Those are my questions.
Okay, and it's a good one because crafters have that instinct. Artists are people who see the potential in all things, right? Like every artist sees a creative potential for all things. And what looks like trash to someone else is a craft supply to somebody who likes to do that kind of crafting. And so if you are the person that sees the potential in all things, here's what I say. Yes, there is potential in all things, but you cannot own 100% of that potential in your life. And you cannot manage 100% of that potential, and you cannot realize 100% of that potential. So for you, you need to constantly be grading one against the other and saying, is this something that, like, I can see the potential in everything that I touch, but does this have a potential that really draws me to immediately make me want to use it, like I'm super thrilled about it? Or is this just one that goes, yeah, I can see that you could use that for something? If you recognize your own level of enthusiasm and that artist moment where you go, oh my God, that's the coolest thing. Oh my God, that's so cool. And then there's I could see you could do something with that. Like if you have a lukewarm response to its potential, then you're probably never going to let that come to the top of the list because you're going to spend your time with the stuff that makes you go, oh my God, that is so cool. So the, oh my God, that is so cool stuff is the projects that get your attention. They come to the top of the list. They are the most likely to be picked up when you are hunting for materials to add to something. And so recognize that you come with that immediate filter, which is all things in the universe are cool and can be craft supplies, and just assume that that's the norm. And then ask yourself, how enthusiastic am I about this? If I am super enthusiastic about it, yeah, you can add it to the craft pile. If you are only lukewarm about it, then you need to let it go and let it wait for the person. Let it go down the river of stuff for some artist who thinks it's super fabulous and they want to pick it up right now, because you will not be able to materialize and use everything that you can possibly see the potential for. Please don't try, because you'll drown. And then you will choke yourself out of the ability to do anything. So you're aiming for the top 50% of your enthusiasm, not the bottom 50%. And we know that you have enthusiasm for all things. So we just are going to call that the norm. and then we're going to let the lower half of that enthusiasm, you can go, hey, that's cool, and you can still let it flow by in the river of stuff. Don't pick it up. Only pick it up if it really, really jazzes you up, because that's the stuff that you will pay attention to, and that's the stuff that you will actually use someday. And somebody else will go, okay, there you go.
Amy on YouTube said, I inherited a bunch of knitting needles from my grandmother. She taught me to knit, and I used them from time to time with the dream of being a knitter of beautiful sweaters until I got nerve damage. So far, I haven't been able to get rid of the needles. I can't really use them, but for some reason, I can't seem to get rid of them.
The thing about the knitting needles is, I mean, clearly you have a memory of learning from your grandmother, and that is a special warm attachment to your grandmother that you have, and you associate them with the knitting needles. And when he first read this comment to me, the thought that I had was, even with nerve damage, you might be able to do some knitting if you adapt to the nerve damage. Like maybe you want to use bigger knitting needles and large, thicker threads, thicker yarns. Not knowing the nature of the damage and how flexible your hands are, you might be able to not use the really small needles, but you might be able to use the really fat ones and do that as a way to sort of keep the knitting as part of your life, even though you can't really follow your pursuit of creating all these beautiful sweaters because of the incapacity you have. So I would ask if you can go to a knitting store or a knitting friend and say, is there a way that I can adapt to what my fingers can do and still be able to knit some, still be able to honor the connection to your grandmother, still be able to have that as part of your active life? And if you investigate and find that you really can't, then I would say you have this whole collection and none of it is going to get used. If you find that you can use fat needles, then I would say keep the fat needles and let the little ones go. If you can't use any of them, then I would say keep a little representative sample. So, keep 5 pairs of needles, or, what will fit in a little jar. Keep a little bit of them as the connection to your grandmother and the touchstone for your grandmother. And then let the rest go to somebody else who's into knitting. And maybe several somebodies who are into knitting, and let it go to a creative reuse store so that people that knit can come and take your grandmother's stuff home, and think of it as a way to send your grandmother's loving attention to you and teaching you. It's such a women in craft is such a generational transition thing. We all learned from somebody that came before us, and we pass it down, behind us, and craft is transferred in that way. And there's part of being, as a crafter, it's important to be part of that chain. And so if how you're part of that chain is that you send your materials on to somebody else to learn with, then it's a way for you to keep them. And I'm guessing that because your grandmother was a serious knitter, she probably had a really big collection. Most people that are into knitting have unbelievable number of sizes and circular needles and not circular needles, and they go from little bitty tiny stick things you do socks with to super huge fat things that are this big around to use this really big yarn and make really big loose knits. And like any craft, there's a million tools, right? I'm guessing she has a big supply, and just having them as a decorative object is probably too much. And so find the ones that you find appealing to look at and let them go on to be, let your grandmother pass to go learn and teach to somebody else down the river of craft, because some other person is going to pick up those knitting needles and love them and play with them and have a great time.
Wolf on Facebook said,
hi, Wolf.
I found there were some things I got intending to use. Instead of getting rid of some, I made a real effort to start actually using it. You can schedule it in, and then you can still get rid of it if you find you aren't really enjoying it, and it feels less bad at that point for me.
There you go, because you made an attempt, right? You've tried it out, and that is a good thing. That's great. That's a great solution. And if you have to try the craft out before you feel comfortable letting it go, at least you've made an effort and you've reminded yourself that the reason that you didn't do it is because you didn't like it. My perfect example of this is my friend Sandy, who she decided that she wanted to get into quilting. And so she went and she had, I don't know if she bought a sewing machine or she had a sewing machine, but she went and bought fabric and she went to go take this quilting class. And she took the class and she cried in the class and she cried more than once. And, you know, at the end of the day, she was like, no, I have never been so miserable doing a craft in my life. And, you know, we all can appreciate the brilliance and beauty of a well-sewn quilt and all of the love and care that goes into the design and all the cool fabric, and the look of it is so fabulous. And she really wanted to be able to quilt. And she just really couldn't. Like, she tried. And it was just a complete, like, whatever her crafting mojo was, it did not apply to sewing machine and thread and fabric. And she was very disappointed about it, but it was like, yeah, I tried and I sucked, and I'm never gonna quilt. And so she had her experience and failure and walked away. And so she had things to get rid of as a result after that. And it is true that all crafting is a different kind of art with different tools and focus and skill sets. And, you know, people that are into weaving aren't necessarily into beading. There's different focuses about your personality and how you like to create. And so if you try a craft and it's not for you, and move on to the next one, right? But don't let those materials languish. Let them be passed on to the next crafter who's going to be super excited about finding your stuff.
Abby, who's with us in Zoom, mentions the UFO, or unfinished object, and says sometimes you just toss it. I started a knit sweater coat in 1975. long down to the knees, but I didn't have the skills, as I was just a kid, to understand all the instructions. I did get to almost and didn't know how or who to ask for help. I carried those parts of sweater until a couple of years ago. I realized I would not buy that yarn as an adult, and if I hadn't finished it to give it to someone in all these years, I wasn't going to in the future. I tossed and felt such a relief at that burden.
Right, because it was, you know, it was an unfinished project that was still mocking you decades later, right? Oh my God, we have all had that project that we started it and it was horrible. The process didn't work, or we had a creative vision and it did not realize to something fabulous like we thought it would, or we took a class and we were doing the project and we're like, oh my God, I took a class and made all the components for the necklace, but I hated the way that she had designed the necklace itself. And so I did something completely freeform with the components instead. I just made something different out of it. And that was how I recovered, because I was never going to finish building the necklace the way that she had designed it and showed us in the class. And so sometimes you get part of the way through the project and you're like, no, this is not going to work. This is no good. I don't like this. And that's okay. You can totally think that. And if you don't want to finish it, send it on to somebody that does. I mean, that's the perfect thing to call your friends who's into knitting and say, I mean, clearly you've already given your sweater away, but anybody else that has that kind of project where it's like, yeah, my mother started this and she didn't finish it. I started this and I'm not going to finish it. Does somebody want it? And let somebody take it away. At the very least, they can undo it. At least with the knitting, you can just undo it and reclaim the yarn if you want. And if not that, then make an effort to finish it. Or if you don't have the desire or focus to finish it, then make an effort to get it in front of other people that might want to go, hey, yeah, I'm cool. That looks cool. I'll finish that up. I mean, I could have, that particular long sweater would have been something that it's just an example. You could have taken it to a knit store to get coaching about it, or you could have given it to another knitter to see if they wanted to finish it. maybe they would have cut it up and used it as something else. Maybe it would have gotten folded into another piece. And so it's always, I'm certainly, I support your decision to let it go. And I'm not telling you not to. I'm just using it as an example, because we all have UFOs that we have decided and tried and worked on. No way in hell am I finishing this. Why is it still here? And a lot of times what happens in beading, because beads are reusable, it gets cut up and the beads get reclaimed. But if it's, maybe it's a piece of paper or scrapbooking you glued, or it's not recoverable, but you can tear it up and call it used supplies, and send it in as a bundle on to the next person that's making junk journals or doing collage work, because crafters see the potential in all things, right? So some crafter is going to look at your UFO and see the potential and do something with it. And maybe they won't complete it how it was designed to be completed, but they might still do something with it. So if you don't love it, if you're not going to finish it, send it on its way and let some other crafter play with it. That's the bottom line.
Gail, Susie on Facebook
Hi, Susie.
mentioned this is a great time to sell used bikes. The shops are sold out of mid-priced bikes, and everybody wants to ride right now because it's one of the things you could do that's safe, relatively
right? Because
safe.
you can go outside and not be in trouble. And think about that. Like, all those people are trying to get their kids outside on bicycles because their kids are driving them crazy, right? And so this would be a perfect time to go out and put all your bikes that your kids, your kids are 30 and the bikes are from when they were 12. Time to let those bikes go. And, yes, some of them may need work or repair, but you can pass that work and repair on as well. If you're giving away a free bike, then, if they have to invest in new tires or something, okay, then they can take that project on if they want. So perfect time to go put those on Nextdoor and say, hey, I've got bikes if anyone wants some. Great idea.
Sarah on Facebook has an interesting comment. She says she's a longtime listener and first-time participant.
Hi,
and
Sarah.
On today's topic, I found that for the hobbies that come and go based on ability to engage, interest, interpersonal connections, we can let those artifacts go. There are usually some things that are tied to one's purpose, something that's central to your identity and transcends or weathers through whatever season you are in life. For example, writing materials, a computer to connect a table or desk, a few books that you reference, and so on. The things that have a direct function in your purposeful activity in tune with who you are.
And those are the things you're saying that you want to keep.
Right.
Yeah.
So she kind of compares things to her greater purpose activity.
Oh, and uses that as a marker to filter things.
Right.
Okay, I'm with you. I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
well,
that's a great idea.
It's a long comment. I don't want to read the whole thing, but it'll be on the Facebook.
Okay.
It'll be on the Facebook notes on this video for anybody who'd like to read the whole thing. I hate to cut it off, but she has a lot to say. On that, I have a list of ongoing goals and priorities, and tend to use that to weigh, does this current thing I'm thinking about doing really fit? When I get to being too busy with a million things to do, it's good to stop and look at that list and go, oh yeah, I'm headed off down a rabbit hole.
A rabbit hole that doesn't support things that I currently want in my life, or things that I'm currently aiming for in my life, changes that I'm trying to make in my life. Yeah. It's super easy to distract yourself, that is for sure. And, crafting is the ever expanding rabbit hole. You can always find another craft and another reason to go shopping. And you have to remember that all people that do some kind of art or hobby find that collecting the stuff is a different hobby than doing the hobby. So you have to be very careful that you're not indulging in your collecting that hobby, and instead of actually getting material you're going to use for the hobby, right? That's if we often fall into that trap where we just start buying stuff to be able to grow the supply, and we don't ever actually go and get into the supply. And like Wolf said earlier, better to go and right now, particularly go and use the stuff that you've got and go figure out what you've got. You probably don't remember what all is in there. And so opening up some of those bags that are in your studio area, going into some of those drawers and digging out and seeing and where is this UFO? And I forgot I didn't finish that yet. Do a little digging, do a little exploring in your own area. And that's my version of shop your own store. If you have a big supply, and I have 30 years of beads in there, I have no idea all the stuff that I have. I generally know what, here's where some pearls are, and here's where the raku is, and here's where the seed beads are. I can tell you where the size 11 seed beads are, but I cannot begin to tell you how much I have of what any particular color. And once it gets to be beyond a very small set, you don't remember everything that you have. So going and shopping, wandering in your own store and finding stuff that you don't remember that you have is just as good as shopping, because it's blind to you until you see it again anyway. So you might as well go shopping in your own store. That's what I'm saying about it.
Lorraine said, I thought one day I would eventually learn to love to knit or crochet. Never happened. I donated my yarn to a church that makes prayer shawls and baby blankets.
Perfect population for it.
They were so happy to have 3 large garbage bags full of yarn. They made me a beautiful blanket.
Oh, that was kind. And the people that do that here, making baby blankets and prayer shawls, they have an endless need to make them. It's a project that they're doing as a
ministry
they're doing a ministry. They're doing a focus. They're trying to put love out in the world in this way. And so it's about volume, and it's about consistent output. And so they have an ever growing need for supply, and how great that you gave it to them so that they're not always spending their own money on it. There's always things like that going on that need a refresh of supplies that can use what you have. And so how great of you to think to do that, and how cool that they gave you a blanket back. That's super awesome. I love that.
Eileen mentioned that with people avoiding gyms, home fitness equipment is hard to find in stores right now. So now would be a good time to get rid of equipment you're not using anymore.
Good point. That is so true, because everybody's like, not going in that gym. Don't want to go in that locker room. Like, that seems like a really bad idea at this point. And so how great. You can put it on Nextdoor. So
or Facebook Marketplace.
But it'll be people in your zip code, people in your area. And then you just put on there, hi, I have this thing. I can't lift it. You got to come and get it. And then, everybody can put masks on long enough for them to come in your house and take the thing out. And won't that be a huge piece of real estate that's freed up? Sporting equipment, fitness equipment in the house always feels like visual torture to me. It's always sitting in the house and everybody's staring at it. And it's just like the biggest piece of furniture mocking you for not doing it. It's like, you may have an exercise bike, but you don't do the exercise bike anymore. And now it just mocks you. Laugh, laugh, laugh. And it's a constant, poke in the face. Let it go. Let somebody else that wants to ride a bike do their thing in their own home, and you can move on to the walking you're doing outside or whatever new equipment that you bought that you like better, and let the old ones go. That's a great idea. God, they're so heavy and they take up so much room, and it is the worst thing to keep if you're not using it, because man, they take up some real estate. You know what I'm saying? The footprint is huge.
Yeah. I dropped out a few minutes ago. The meeting booted me out, I guess, because my connection was so dodgy. So I lost some of the chat.
I see one here that a mentor once told me, Tim says, a mentor once told me, was this your hobby or a hobby you inherited? I inherited tubs filled with beads, jewelry making supplies, etc. For a while, I thought about using them. I thought about selling them, but I didn't want to deal with putting hundreds, probably thousands of little baggies of beads onto eBay. So I donated a huge amount to an artist friend. Then I found 2 more tubs brought them to Texas and hosted several giveaway moments to friends who are crafters. It didn't go completely as planned, but they left enough to make me feel good about what the other friends found. It is true that my nieces and nephews are going to have to clean out the beads in my house when I'm gone. And I feel bad about that. And I hope that, later in my life, I will help thin the collection that they have to process. But it is, if you are a lifetime crafter, you're going to leave behind a collection that requires rehoming. And if you inherited it, don't feel like you have to take on your ancestors' craft. You can let someone else that's into it take it on. We laugh about bead executors. We have amongst our friends, we say that, as soon as I die, run over to the house before my husband puts all the beads on the curb. So we have to relocate them.
We had a question about collecting antiques to sell in a future booth.
Basically, the idea of collecting antiques for a future booth, you have to ask yourself how dedicated you are to the idea of stocking a booth, manning a booth, refreshing a booth. Like, you can't go set it up one time and leave it. If you want to continuously make sales, you have to take on the part-time job of filling the booth, adding stuff to the booth, moving things around, cleaning things in the booth. If people go through your little antique booth mall regularly and your setup doesn't change over time, they're going to slowly ignore it. It's going to start being background noise to them. So it does require, for that to work, you have to agree that you want to have a part-time job of filling the booth, maintaining the booth, cleaning the booth, refreshing the booth. And if you don't think you're going to do that, then I would question whether you are just using that as a reason to collect, or if you are really serious about trying to churn the stuff. Anybody that makes money on selling and actually moves the volume that comes through is going to antique sales. They're going to set up booths at, weekend events. They're going to the roadside sales. They're going to swap meets. They're hauling all this antique furniture and objects around with them in the car and setting them up in a booth and then breaking them down again. And it's a lot of physical work. It's a lot of constant taking things in motion. And so I would really ask yourself, I know that you're comfortable with the buying part of creating the inventory, but you have to ask yourself how serious you are about the work of selling, because that is a lot of work and it's not fun and it's physical. And so if that sounds like the best Saturday spent ever, then awesome. But if it doesn't sound like fun, if you hesitate at the idea of stocking and maintaining and refreshing all the time, or putting it in and out of the car 16 times before it finally sells, as you go back and forth to swap meets or whatever, the weekend antique roadside sale, if you have to do that 20 times before you sell a piece of furniture, are you really going to want to put it in and out of the car that many times? If that doesn't sound like fun to you, then you need to rethink that hobby. Come up with a different plan. That's my idea about that. Antiques are hard because they're big and heavy and they require dusting. And it's not exactly a low labor intensive project, is what I'm saying.
Gail, Lorraine has shared a picture of the blanket.
Oh, look at that.
Isn't
that pretty? That's lovely. Well, that was nice. So they just use all kinds of yarn and put it all together in stripes, and how fabulous. Thanks for showing us.
Okay, we are about out of time.
Oh, we are. Okay, good.
And I hope that my connection will be stable long enough for us to make quick announcements. Or do you want to improvise the announcements?
Okay. So here's the announcements. If you want to follow us on YouTube, you can go to cfhou.com/YouTube. Don't forget to click the little bell so that you get the notifications. And that will tell you, because we do this recording and then he edits and puts on YouTube. And so it takes a couple of days for it to show up on YouTube. And if you want to be notified about that, then you can click the little bell. If you want to be notified of future meetings, you can join the meetup group, and then you'll get automatic notifications of all of our events. cfhou.com/meetup. You can follow us on Facebook, and of course we broadcast live in Facebook so that you can interact with us in real time. We so appreciate that you do that because it makes it so much more fun for me. So here is cfhou.com/Facebook, and the recording will stay when we're done in Facebook, and you can continue to make comments. I do my best to read and chat with everybody about it as the week goes by. So feel free to come and make your comments if we didn't get to read them here. We'll be able to see them later.
And we don't have a sign for it, but if you'd like to contribute financially to support our activities, you can also go to cfhou.com/Patreon and become a Patreon supporter.
Patreon is a fundraising mechanism where you can commit to donating a little bit of money every month to help us do our thing. And so we do this as out of the, our fun and entertainment and at our expense. So anybody wants to help, we appreciate it. If you would like to get email notifications about anything and get our new emails when we actually send them out, cfhou.com/subscribe will put you on our mailing list so that you get stuff via email if that's your preferred way of getting notified. And whatever's happening, whatever event, whatever action is going on for the Clutter Fairy, it is always on the website, clutterfairyhouston.com. You can find all of our events and contacts there. We appreciate you so much.
How about your final thoughts?
Ooh, my final thoughts. Okay. So my final thoughts, and we go through periods in our lives where we want to try out all kinds of new things, and you try a craft and you don't like it, or you break your ankle and you can't play softball anymore, but you keep all the gear because someday you're going to go back there. You're going to do it again. Look through your life for the things that you've moved on from, that you've evolved beyond, that you've tried and rejected, and let go of the stuff that no longer supports your life, that's no longer a part of who you are or who you want to be. What will you get in return? You'll free up some space. You might find that you're able to move to a place of greater acceptance about the changes and transitions in your life. You might set yourself free to move forward into the next thing. And you might make space in your life for something new and wonderful by letting go of the stuff that no longer is part of who you are. Those are my final thoughts.
All right. Thanks.
We appreciate you guys joining us. We're so happy to see you every week, and we'll see you next week. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.